HBO's The Last of Us is easily and unassailably the best live-action adaptation of a video game that I've ever seen. It didn't break the so-called video game curse, because it's not the first good game adaptation, and it also doesn't put an end to bad ones in the future. But it does tell us a lot about what it takes to bring a video game to TV or film and do it justice. So in reviewing the first season, now it's over, let's talk about that. I'm not going to talk in depth about any plot points in this video. Check out my episodic spoiler cast if you want that, as I break down each episode with guests. However, please be aware some of the footage and references are mild spoilers if you haven't seen the show and want to go into it completely blind. First, it's worth looking at all of the elements that came together to make up the final product we saw. The most obvious thing is that it looked and felt not just real, but real in a grand and gorgeous way that spoke to the care taken in location scouting, wardrobe, set dressing, makeup and more. And all of this was complemented by superb direction and cinematography, which were as effective and integral to the storytelling as the writing and performances. As just one example, winter in Jackson was substantively different to winter in Silver Lake. One was a hearth and a beacon, a refuge from the cold with celebration in the air, whilst the other was desolate and threadbare, its people clinging on for dear life. All of this was established independent of the dialogue and characterization, which of course underlined that point and led us through the story that this visual world building had created. In and of itself, all of that is a good sign for any show. It's the kind of thing that HBO has a reputation for. But on top of that, as a player of the game, you can see on screen the landscapes you've walked through countless times. A broken and overgrown stretch of highway is as instantly recognisable as, say, the exterior of the Raccoon Police Department in Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. Yet that post-apocalyptic road that we'd visit for 5 minutes in a TV show feels more tangible than the RPD's green-screened interior did when we spent a good third of the film there. The fact that the effects were majority practical, with the clickers and the bloater alike essentially people in suits, added to the immersion. Of course, VFX played a significant role in the show, and it's to the team's credit that most of their work is invisible, but we've known how easy it is for effects to look cheap. Contrast what HBO did with The Last of Us to the declining standards of Marvel CGI, which, yes, will be as much about how the company treats their VFX artists as any other factor, and you can see just how well everything came together on The Last of Us. It's also worth giving credit to the fantastic music that underpins everything. Of course, fans of the game will already know how effective composer Gustavo Santaolalla is at establishing mood and tone with his music, but combined with the strategic use of licensed tracks, particularly from the 1980s, makes the score across the episodes worthy of every possible accolade. Last but not least here, the performances from pretty much everyone in the cast have been on point. I can't think of a single weak link when it comes to the acting, but there were certainly standouts. It would take half the video to go into all of their respective merits, so I'll just list off Nico Parker as Sarah, Anna Torv as Tess, Nick Offerman as Bill and Murray Bartlett as Frank, Haven Woodward as Sam and Lamar Johnson as Henry, Melanie Linsky as Kathleen, Mel Dandridge as Marlene, Gabrielle Luna as Tommy, Dawn Reed as Riley, and of course Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal. Bella in particular was the runaway star of the show. From the subtler moments like her childlike glee in breaking down Joel's walls with stupid puns, to the fear, rage and trauma of her encounter with David, she absolutely shone. I remember when all we had was that initial 30-second teaser for the show, people criticised her delivery of the lines from the game's farmhouse scene as being too bland and emotionless.
Everybody I have cared for has either died or left me.
But of course, the lines they showcased, in context, led into a truly powerful emotional moment as she poured her heart out about being left alone by everyone she cared for.
Everybody fucking except for you!
Which brings me, before I talk about how the writing and direction shaped all of these elements into what we saw on screen and how it works as an adaptation, onto the discourse that preceded the show being aired. Although I doubt it will, because of how the internet works, The Last of Us should really teach people to judge shows and films based upon the final product rather than on gossip and out-of-context quotes. There certainly are reasons to be wary of certain productions based on the news coming out of them, but that's more reason to use our critical faculties when talking about these things, rather than abandon them and leap to rage. There was outrage when Craig Mazin supposedly attacked video games by saying deaths in the show would have more impact than the death of pixels in the game. But the actual context of the quote made clear that he was talking about the way, as a player, we can casually kill hundreds of NPCs and view them as no more than an obstacle. And in the show, we saw how much more impactful the violence was due to it not being constant and indiscriminate. The infected were a greater force to be reckoned with and feared because we didn't see Joel casually beating, strangling and stabbing them to death. And instead, every single encounter with infected in the show has led to death or disaster. There may be far fewer of them on show here than in the game, but they are far more terrifying and fatal. Humans were both more terrifying and more fragile. Joel cannot simply bandage his arm to heal a bullet wound here, so combat is not entered into lightly, and him not having the body count he does from the game both gives his panic attacks and hesitation so much more weight, because Joel doing this in the game simply wouldn't be believable with the need to provide combat for players to engage in, and heightens the impact when he takes up arms in the final episode to save Ellie. Another controversy was that neither Pedro Pascal nor Bella Ramsey had played The Last of Us before performing the show. This supposedly made them getting it wrong inevitable. Instead, as we saw, rather than copying Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson's performances, they delivered their own takes on the material on the page, much of which was lifted directly from the game and scripted with oversight and direct input from the writer and creative director of the game. And had whoever was writing and directing the show not either been directly involved with the source material or cared about it, Pedro and Bella playing the games would have done precisely nothing to fix that. Just as Henry Cavill's familiarity with the source material did nothing to address the unfaithfulness of Netflix's The Witcher to the books or game that some fans have been extremely vocal about, and which appears to have ultimately resulted only in him leaving the show. All of which leads us on to the question of what makes a good adaptation, and why The Last of Us succeeded where many other films or shows based on games have failed. Certainly, I think that the involvement of the original creators is a huge advantage. But without that, at the least putting the adaptation in the hands of someone who cares about and respects the source material is a must. Even if nobody else has any clue about the thing being adapted, then the showrunners and the writers absolutely should know what they're talking about. Failing at this can go in two opposing directions. Looking at Resident Evil again, both because it's a series I'm intimately familiar with and because it's a supreme example of a game that's been continually poorly adapted, the Paul W.S. Anderson films are an obvious case of not caring. It's an action-cum superhero film and star vehicle with the game IP slapped onto it as window dressing. Or equally, Welcome to Raccoon City made a song and dance out of its supposed faithfulness to the games. Yet this turned out to be inspired by watching Let's Play videos on YouTube rather than actually experiencing the games. And the film was a composite of fan service Easter eggs which in many cases not only didn't save the story, but actively contradicted it. Director Johannes Roberts may as well have personally popped up every few minutes to say, "Hey, you see that? Hey, that's in the game, that is." Please like this. When The Last of Us lifts dialogue and scenes directly from the game, it's because they fit the moment best and serve the story. That's in part testament to the quality of writing of the original, of course, but equally the show never feels like it's presenting its faithfulness up for a reward, like a child hoping their scribble will be pinned to the fridge. We know this because as much as we've had some absolutely perfect beat-for-beat game moments, the show hasn't been afraid to make changes when necessary. A big part of this, as mentioned, is combat. Not only for the impact it affords to the encounters that do happen, but also because we interact with games differently than TV shows. In a game, switching perspectives as frequently as the show has would break immersion, so we see the world through Joel's and, at one point, Ellie's eyes. We also need something to actually play. As much as it's an easy trope to write The Last of Us off as an interactive movie, comparing that to actual interactive movies shows that up as nonsense. And the majority of the 10 to 15 hours you spend with the game will be engaged in combat encounters. Removing these elements, we can expand more on the character moments, the backstory, and additional beats that would have absolutely thrown off the pacing of the game. Nowhere is this more evident than in Episode 3. Bill and Frank's story, of course, ends differently in the game, but the change actually allows the show to underline even more explicitly the themes of the narrative about love, violence, and the latter in service of the former, as well as telling a side story that was only hinted at and moving away from the bury or gaze trope. Sure, as a consequence, we were robbed of some interaction between Ellie and Bill, but whilst funny, this did nothing to actually advance the narrative. It would have come off as more fan-servicey, especially with it padded out by the game's trip through the infected side of town, which would have been impossible with the infected as established in the previous episode without severely undermining everything set up about them, such as the fact that the network of tendrils basically means you can't go where they are without being detected and very quickly overwhelmed. Many of those who leapt upon the aforementioned controversies essentially wanted HBO to lift the cutscenes from the game and act them out, which would have filled the runtime of a film, come off as cheap and lazy, and not landed the same, devoid of the context built by the immersion and relationships built through gameplay. Because TV doesn't have gameplay, adaptation then becomes akin to translation. If you're translating a book from one language to another, sure, you can just throw it in Google Translate and call it a day, but to do it well, you're not always taking a word in one language and swapping it for the same word in another. You're examining meaning and impact, and where necessary making changes in order to reflect that in the relevant context. The Last of Us takes the task of translating the story from the game to television very seriously, and does it excellently. There are certainly moments where it's apparent that games do some things better, The interactivity of the game version of Left Behind gives considerably more weight to the arcade scene where Ellie and Riley play the turning, which is no doubt why the show instead chose that moment to pull away and reveal the infected. But equally, as mentioned, the show has managed to expand on the story beats that the game couldn't. That difference in medium will create a disconnect for some fans of the game. Without the combat set pieces, Episode 6 in particular feels like an awful lot is crammed into a small space, and so it's easy to see why people might feel it was rushed. But, being generous, the actual story of those sections in the game takes up about half an hour, the episode being a full hour, so it may just be a disadvantage of going into this familiar with the game that creates that feeling. All of which is to say that there's a fine balance in adapting a game, or I guess anything, to live action, that involves handling the source material with affection, whilst also being attentive to the necessity of adaptational differences, and telling the story in a way that actually works for both the narrative and the medium, rather than leaning on fanservice. Certainly, although as already mentioned, I'm not hopeful the discourse will ever stop, it puts paid to the notions that changes are always bad regardless of context, and that exactly replicating the game beat for beat with a cast who played the game is necessary, or even desirable. The end result of all of this isn't just a story that stands out as one of the best video game adaptations of all time, finely balanced between faithfulness and expansion, but also one of the most thrilling, heart-rending, tense and emotional pieces of television I've ever watched. Every piece of the whole, from the performances to the writing to the makeup and set dressing to the VFX and music, come together to deliver something greater than the sum of its parts. A treat for game fans, for sure, but I also envy those coming at this completely fresh. What did you think of The Last of Us? And are you coming at it as a fan of the games or as someone new to the franchise? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content, like the video that's just popped up, which YouTube thinks you should watch next. Check out the links in the description to join my Patreon for as little as £1 per month or donate to my GoFundMe and get your name in the credits of my videos, like those rolling up now, who I want to thank for supporting me and my content. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.